Welcome to the ALPS Career Hub's conversation on unmasking imposter syndrome. My name is Abigail Barclay and I'm the Managing Director of Inspired's Executive Search Division. Inspired Search. Alongside our day-to-day headhunts, I author and publish white papers on key industry trends, the most recent of which was on gender equity within publishing leadership. And as you might well imagine, this included content on imposter syndrome. Like you, I wanted to find out more about the topic, so I'm delighted to be joined here today by the expert, Sarah Durrant, who will help us unmask imposter syndrome. Let me introduce Sarah to you, and then I'll be asking a few questions to do just that. So after careers in publishing, international development, consultancy, Sarah qualified as a professional coach in 2013. Since then, she's offered transformational courses, workshops, webinars, one-to-one coaching and small group learning journeys, helping people develop their inner leadership skills. She's delivered a range of imposter syndrome learning journeys since 2017. Her clients include publishers, universities and academic libraries, as well as the BBC, BAFTA, Ofcom, the College of Policing of England and Wales, and Unison. Thank you, Sarah, for joining me today. I'm really looking forward to learning more. I think a good place to start would be right at the beginning, at a very, very top level introduction to imposter syndrome. Sarah, what is imposter syndrome?
Thanks, Abigail. Thank you very much. Well, in the beginning, imposter syndrome was a phrase coined by two psychology students, master students at the Oberlin College in the US in the 70s. They were both women, and I don't think they knew one another, but they connected around this. They were the only women in this huge cohort of master students reading psychology. And they connected around this shared sense that they didn't belong in the group.
Okay.
It was only a matter of time before they were found out, which is a curiously detailed experience. You know, there's lots of things they might have felt, but they had in common this sense of a kind of nebulous sense of fraudulence. They shouldn't be there. And as I say, this sense that at some point someone was going to tap them on the shoulder and usher them out of the room. And they were so curious about this specific constellation of experiences that I think they made it their master's research.
Okay.
And it was they who coined this term imposter syndrome. And fast forward to now, where things have got, you know, perhaps a wee bit more detailed, a little bit more flesh on the bones. And commonly, the sort of sense of imposter syndrome in this era, as you like, if you like, is a sense of just kind of not belonging, not feeling comfortable, having a lot of self-doubt, having a sense of, that same sense of fraudulence. I actually looked up the definition of the word imposter this morning, because which is something amazingly I haven't done in the 8 years I've been teaching this stuff. And the Cambridge Dictionary says a person pretending to be someone else to deceive others. So I think that's kind of interesting, because one of the things I think imposter syndrome might be about for some of us is a fear that we're pretending to be something or someone we're not. And of course, in a lot of modern high-pressured workplaces, quite a lot of that behavior is encouraged. It's the sort of shadow side, if you like, of the fake it till you make it philosophy. And I think it can put a lot of stress on people and a lot of strain, but we might get into that as we go through. But
yeah. Absolutely. And you've touched upon a few features of the syndrome, or this concept for us there. But yes, let's go into it a bit more detail. What are some of the common symptoms, I guess, if we're going to use that analogy, of imposter syndrome?
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, I call them symptoms in my work. I don't know if it's helpful. I would say a few things, Abigail. For me, I think there's a constellation of thoughts, kind of emotions and feelings, beliefs. I want to speak a little bit about bodily sensations as well. And I might even touch on or speak a little bit to what I'm going to call kind of spiritual or existential pieces to this.
Okay.
Because very often when you look it up online for the sort of more kind of Huffington Post, little piece or opinion piece on that kind of thing, it will probably just stay with the thoughts and the feelings and a little of the belief. And that's fine, but I think it's broader. So common thoughts: I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy enough. It might be I've got nothing to contribute. We might be sitting in a meeting, for example, and have the thought, there's an impulse to say something, to make a contribution, to, oh, I think I've got something to say here. And then immediately the thought might come in to almost cap that, which is, something like, no one would want to hear me. I've got nothing original to say, nothing to contribute. And then, 9 times out of 10, a few minutes later, someone says something and everyone goes, oh, that's marvelous. And you think, oh, that was actually the point I was going to make. And although, yeah, I mean, we can perhaps speak to a little bit of the impact of this in a moment, but if I stay with my kind of thoughts, feelings, emotions, and so on. Feelings, I would say anything constellating around fear, around shame, not good enough, not worthy enough, not skilled enough, not talented enough. Symptoms often have a sense of comparison with other folk, that they're usually more skilled, they're more talented. In other words, whoever we're looking at, they're more than us and we're less than them. And of course, that's a very disempowered and disempowering scheme to be in. And the challenge with that, I think the challenge of this work is to just right size everything. Like, I'm okay, you're okay.
Yes.
And of course, in some places, people are going to have more skills. They are going to have more aptitude, more experience. They might even have more talent. That's quite likely in places. But I think the challenge of imposter syndrome is it then sort of catapults us into a place of, I have none of those things, I never will. And then that's a shame place. And that's a very difficult place to get out of on one's own. So thoughts and feelings, beliefs, part of that. I shouldn't be here, I'm going to get fired, all these things. And I would say bodily sensations, it can be quite an activated state. So the brain might perceive imposter thoughts and beliefs as a threat, which will activate the threat protection system, so fight, flight, freeze, fawn. And then what we see coming off of that potentially are what I call the draining Ps. So 4 behaviors broadly that we can go into to kind of overcompensate for these very uncomfortable imposter feelings and thoughts. So procrastination, people pleasing, perfectionism. And the 4th P I've called powering through, because I like I wanted all P's. But essentially, I think it's not too much of a stretch to say that these can be mapped to the 4 Fs of the threat protection system in mammals. So fight, flight, freeze, fawn. So fighting might be perfectionism. We're kind of fighting reality. We're trying to get things perfect. Actually, perfect doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Flight, for me, maps quite nicely with powering through, because we're just throwing a load of adrenaline at everything. We're working 18 hours a day. We're taking all the calls. We're taking all the meetings. We're doing all the things. But what we're not doing is tending to our energy levels and our well-being and all of that. Procrastination, I think, maps to freeze quite nicely, or quite clearly. We don't know what to do because we're sort of in a fear or shame state that's quite constricting, and we end up doing either not very much or not enough, and then collapsing in a sort of heap. And by the way, I don't want to make any of these wrong. They're simply human. And then the last one, people pleasing, I think maps very clearly to fawning in the 4 Fs for mammals. Very, very common amongst women in particular, because it's quite culturally appreciated. It's culturally upheld in women to be nice and agreeable and all these things, which are actually quite exhausting and inauthentic. So lots there. And I guess the last piece I would lay alongside that is, I said very briefly, I would touch on what I'm calling the spiritual or existential. I think this sort of dread feeling of I don't belong. And for mammals, that's that, you know, for humans as mammals, that's a very, very fierce set of thoughts and beliefs, because of course it attacks us right at the roots. If we don't belong, you know, we're a social being, and our brains and nervous systems are wired for connection. So that again can activate, you know, a lot of adrenaline, a lot of cortisol. It doesn't feel pleasant. But I think probably one of the number one symptoms of imposter syndrome is a very active inner critic.
Okay.
So in her TED talk, Jill Bolte Taylor does a wonderful TED talk called My Stroke of Genius, about the time when she had a stroke. But she talks about there were times during the experience of the stroke when part of her brain went completely offline, and she noticed her inner critic had completely just stopped. And for folk who aren't familiar with the name, the inner critic is just that sort of commentary that can go on inside of us. It's usually critical, as the name suggests. Jill Bolte Taylor refers to it as the itty bitty shitty committee.
Oh gosh.
Which I quite like. But, you know, it's not fun. It's not fun to experience these things: fear, shame, activated states, and activated inner critic. And you know, a big part of my work is to help people notice these things, recognize them, normalize them. At least 70 to 80% of folk experience imposter syndrome. And then, you know, what can we look at to help ourselves navigate these spaces, navigate these feelings, navigate these thoughts? You know, I want people to be able to show up as themselves and to fully contribute. And actually, that's what most organizations want. Most healthy organizations want that of their people too.
Certainly.
So there's all to play for in this work, really. Yeah, I hope that.
That does. I'm really interested in the last couple of answers about some of the use of language there. We started by hearing how the term was coined originally, the etymology of imposter syndrome. And then, you know, we've talked a little bit about the other terms around it, such as symptoms. Do we think we've got this right, the language right? Is it a syndrome?
I think it's a great question, Abigail. I kind of yes and no is my rather unsatisfactory, mealy-mouthed, sitting on the fence response. And I'll say why to the yes and why I believe yes and why I believe no. I'll start with no. I think calling anything syndrome is really unhelpful, really unhelpful. But this is what we've got. The problem with syndrome is I think it pathologizes things. We're already suffering. We're already struggling. You know, we've talked about we're wading in the swamplands of shame here with imposter syndrome. So to me, that word is, you know, can really pathologize and is not helpful. On the other hand, it calls attention to itself, and then it makes me get really curious. Well, if it's not, you know, pathological, what is it? You know, what is it? And my sense is, yeah, it's the things we've been speaking of, really. And it's very helpful in that regard, because it's just such a neat two-word phrase that now has got some coinage. You know, people are using it. It is recognized. Michelle Obama has spoken about it. Meryl Streep has talked about it and named it in those terms. I shy away from syndrome in the sense that it can be a bit sort of othering and a bit dehumanizing. But at the same time, you know, you and I are here to talk about it. I imagine people will, you know, engage with this because they've got some sense of resonance. And recognition.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And while you're here on the ALPS Career Hub, there's lots of content in a range of formats for you to look at as well. Lots of freely available for you as you develop your career through scholarly publishing. So enjoy. Thank you very much for listening.